If you have the courage to hear the full nightmare, stay till the end. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to uncover more terrifying stories like this. The night was thick with fog, and the streets were empty, save for the laughter and chatter of 8 friends returning from a late-night party. Their voices echoed through the quiet town as they joked and shoved each other playfully. But one of them, Emily, had always been drawn to stories of the supernatural, and tonight, her curiosity had led them down a deserted road where the silhouette of an abandoned mental hospital loomed like a silent predator. "You guys think it's really haunted?" whispered Sam, glancing nervously at the crumbling gates. The iron bars were rusted, and the paint peeled away in jagged flakes. The stories had said the hospital had been shut decades ago after a fire killed dozens of patients, but rumors claimed that some of them never really left. Their whispers had always been dismissed as myths until tonight. They reached the massive gate. Emily pushed it gently, and it creaked open, as if the hospital itself were inviting them. One by one, they stepped inside. The air was suddenly colder, and a faint smell of smoke mixed with decay made them pause. Behind them, the gate slammed shut with a deafening clang. "Did anyone else hear that?" muttered Daniel, but no one responded. They tried to laugh it off, but laughter felt hollow in the suffocating darkness. Dust motes floated in the weak moonlight, dancing like tiny spirits around them. The main corridor stretched endlessly before them. Broken tiles crunched under their feet as they advanced, flashlights cutting weak swaths of light through the dark. The walls were lined with old patient charts, some yellowed, some blackened by fire. Every now and then, they would glimpse strange shadows that seemed to move on their own, always just at the edge of their vision. The hospital wasn't silent. There were distant creaks, the echo of doors opening, and what sounded like whispers that they could almost understand. Emily's flashlight flickered. She shivered as she noticed a set of clocks on the far wall. There were dozens of them, all stopped at 2:47 a.m., though the night outside had long passed that hour. The friends gathered closer, unease settling over them. There was something unnatural about how everything seemed frozen in that exact moment. It was as if time itself was trapped within these walls. Then it happened. Emily noticed her shadow move differently from the others. She froze, staring as it separated from her body, walking independently toward a darkened library room. Panic welled up in her chest, but curiosity rooted her feet. The shadow bent over an ancient book, its hands tracing the letters as if absorbing the secrets within. Emily's voice trembled as she called, "Guys, look at this!" But Daniel's sudden shout from behind pulled her attention away. The shadow vanished. "Did you see that?" she cried, her voice echoing. The others tried to laugh it off, but their unease was palpable. They pressed on, unaware that the hospital was observing them, its walls hungry for terror, and its dark corners preparing to unveil horrors far beyond what they could imagine. As they moved deeper, a faint, almost inaudible scratching echoed from the floor above them. Each step they took seemed to bring the past closer, as though the patients who died in agony were now reaching for them. The first shiver of true fear had settled in, whispering a warning. This was not just a building, it was a trap, and they were already inside it. The deeper Emily and her friends ventured, the darker and colder the corridors became. The air thickened with the metallic scent of old blood and scorched wood. Each creak of the broken floorboards echoed like a scream, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, crawling along the walls as if they were alive. Sam's flashlight flickered violently, and for a moment, the friends were left in near-total darkness. "Let's just stick together," Emily whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. But her own heartbeat thundered in her ears. Something about this place was wrong. The silence was too deep, too heavy. Even the distant wind outside seemed to vanish once they were inside. They reached a wide room, its doorway half broken, and faint, muffled cries floated from somewhere within. Without thinking, Alex, one of the braver boys, pushed open the door. Inside, the room was coated in grime and ash, and at the far end, a rusty bathroom door rattled as if something was trapped inside. "Did you hear that?" hissed Emily, her eyes wide as the others crowded near the doorway. The cries grew louder, more frantic, twisting into guttural, unhuman sounds. Alex laughed nervously. "Probably just an old animal," he said, stepping closer. But the moment he crossed the threshold, the bathroom door slammed shut behind him with a force that shook the walls. Alex, Daniel screamed, pounding on the door. The muffled screams turned into horrific, high-pitched shrieks. Dust fell from the ceiling as the friends tried desperately to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Then, suddenly, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the scene was unbearable. Alex lay sprawled on the floor, his body twisted in a grotesque angle, blood pouring from his eyes and mouth. His chest moved in shallow, jerking spasms. The friends froze in horror as his empty gaze seemed to follow them, accusing and terrifying all at once. "No, this can't be real," whispered Emily, her knees shaking. But before anyone could react, the room grew colder. Shadows poured out from the corners like black liquid, stretching toward them. The whispers grew into screams, and one by one, each friend felt icy fingers brush their skin, leaving invisible burns. Emily stumbled backward, dragging the others with her, and for the first time, the realization hit. This hospital didn't just trap them, it hunted them. And now, the hunt had begun in earnest. Somewhere in the darkness, something was moving, something hungry, something patient. The first death was only the beginning. Emily and the remaining 7 friends stumbled out of the bathroom, hearts hammering in their chests. The corridor ahead seemed longer than before, walls stretching endlessly, lined with more broken patient charts and flickering lights that cast grotesque shadows. Every sound was magnified. The drip of water from a cracked pipe, the distant clatter of debris, and, most disturbingly, the soft, dragging footsteps that seemed to follow them, echoing their own. "Did you hear that?" whispered Zoe, her voice quivering. Before anyone could answer, a dark figure emerged at the far end of the hall. It was Emily's shadow, but it moved independently, twisting unnaturally, limbs bending in impossible angles. Its face was featureless, but the malevolence radiating from it made her stomach turn. Emily froze. It's my shadow," she stammered. The others rushed to pull her back, but the shadow seemed to anticipate their moves, gliding closer with each step. It paused in front of a massive bookshelf, the dust settling around it like a shroud. There, it bent over an old, tattered book, tracing the letters with hands that weren't hers. "Don't go near it," screamed Daniel, but Emily was drawn in. Curiosity outweighed fear, and her fingers grazed the book's surface. Suddenly, the shadow vanished. The room fell into suffocating silence, broken only by the faintest whispers, echoing from nowhere. A sudden scream shattered the moment. One of the boys, Leo, had vanished into the darkness, dragged into a shadow that seemed to crawl along the walls, clutching him with invisible hands. His terrified shrieks echoed, and then abruptly stopped. Only silence remained. Panic surged. The friends ran blindly, turning corners that led to identical hallways, as though the hospital itself had shifted around them. Every door they opened revealed only more shadows and empty rooms. The clocks on the walls all still read 2:47 a.m., mocking them. Time was frozen, but death was chasing them relentlessly. Emily's flashlight flickered again, revealing movement in the corners, the shadows of her friends stretching and contorting unnaturally, whispering their names in voices both familiar and distorted. A cold wind snaked around their ankles, tripping them, dragging them back toward the center of the building. Zoe screamed as her own shadow lunged for her, wrapping around her like living smoke. She clawed at it, but her hands passed through empty darkness. Emily grabbed her, yanking her away, but Zoe's eyes went wide in terror as the shadow whispered her deepest fears aloud. Then, in an instant, it vanished, leaving her gasping and pale. They realized with growing horror, the hospital didn't just trap them, it fed on fear, multiplying shadows and turning familiar faces into nightmares. Every step forward was a step deeper into death's domain, and Emily knew the first death had only been a warning. The corridor seemed endless. Every turn led them back to the same ghastly hall, clocks frozen at 2:47 a.m., mocking them with their silent ticklessness. Emily's flashlight trembled in her hand as she scanned the darkness, and that's when she saw it. A shadowy figure sitting in a wheelchair at the far end of the hall. Its posture was unnervingly still, but the air around it felt thick with malice. The wheelchair began to move on its own, slowly at first, then accelerating toward them with a guttural screech of metal on tile. The friends froze. unable to process the horror of what they were seeing. Its occupant was a girl, her eyes wide and unblinking, her mouth twisted into a permanent, bloodied grin. Her long hair clung to her scorched, pale face, and blood dripped from her exposed teeth as if it had been feeding on something unseen. "Run!" Emily shouted, grabbing Daniel and pulling him back. The group scattered down a side corridor, but the hospital seemed to fold around them. Every hallway led back to the same wheelchair, getting closer with every heartbeat. The ghost's laughter echoed, a sound that curdled their blood, high-pitched and unearthly, like metal scraping bone. Suddenly, Max, one of the boys, tripped over a broken tile. The wheelchair lunged. Its occupant's hands shot out with impossible speed, grabbing him. Emily turned just in time to see Max being dragged backward, screaming, his body twisting unnaturally, as if the hospital itself was consuming him. His screams faded, leaving only a wet, dragging sound. The remaining friends ran blindly, their panic magnified by the oppressive shadows that seemed to reach out from the walls. The temperature plummeted. Frost formed on their hair and clothes as if the ghost's presence sucked the warmth from their bodies. Every creak and groan of the old building sounded like footsteps chasing them, closing in faster than they could move. Emily glanced back and saw Zoe, her friend from earlier, being lifted off the ground by invisible hands. She clawed and screamed, but the ghost's influence was stronger than anything in the natural world. In seconds, Zoe vanished into the darkness, leaving only a faint echo of her terrified cries. The wheelchair stopped momentarily in the hall, as if surveying its victims. Emily's chest heaved. She realized the hospital wasn't just haunted, it was alive. It orchestrated terror, using fear as a weapon, and its ghostly occupant was the instrument of death. Every hallway, every shadow, every whisper was designed to separate them, isolate them, and eventually consume them. And they were running out of time. The ghost was patient, relentless, and Emily knew that if they didn't find a way out, or a way to stop it, there would be no survivors. The air in the hospital thickened like smoke as Emily and the remaining friends pressed forward, each step more exhausting than the last. Their lungs burned, and the walls seemed to close in, groaning under some unseen weight. Every corner hid shadows that whispered their names in distorted, echoing tones. "They're following us," gasped Daniel, his voice shaking. Emily nodded, clutching her flashlight as if sheer will could keep them alive. She tried to focus, and that's when they saw it. A faint glow coming from the old treatment wing. The machines were still there, twisted, rusted, and ominously humming as if powered by some malevolent force. Electroshock machines, restraints, and scorched wheelchairs littered the room. Emily's stomach churned. That girl, she must have died here," she whispered, realizing that the ghost in the wheelchair was the same girl who had burned alive decades ago in a fire that had claimed dozens. Rumor had it she had survived the fire only to be experimented on, hooked to machines meant to control her mind. But the trauma had made her powerful, and vengeful sudden scream cut through the air. Alex's sister, Lily, who had lagged slightly behind, was dragged backward by invisible hands. She thrashed, clawing at the floor, but the ghost had already marked her. Blood splattered across the walls as the shadow dragged her into the darkness. The rest froze, paralyzed with terror, watching as their friend vanished. Emily's eyes scanned the room. She noticed charred handprints on the walls, symbols of pain and rage left by the girl during her last moments of life. Then, a chilling sound, a low, guttural laugh that seemed to rise from the floor itself. The wheelchair ghost appeared, her eyes wide and unblinking, teeth glinting in the faint light. Slowly, she wheeled herself toward them, dragging a trail of smoke and fire in her wake. "Keep moving," Emily yelled, grabbing Daniel's hand. But the hospital twisted around them like a living labyrinth. Corridors stretched endlessly, doors led to nowhere, and shadows reached out like hands made of black mist. Each time they thought they were escaping, the same hall with the clocks appeared, frozen at 2:47 a.m., mocking their fear. Then they heard it, the faint sound of a heartbeat, slow and deliberate, echoing from the old treatment wing. It grew louder with each step, pounding in rhythm with their own terror. Emily realized this was the ghost's trap. The hospital itself was alive, feeding off panic, and each friend who panicked would become another victim. As they rounded another corner, they found themselves in a room filled with dusty medical files. Emily picked up a tattered journal, its pages describing the girl's life, the fire, the cruel experiments, the machinery, and her transformation into a being that hungered for vengeance. Every word made her skin crawl. Every sentence thickened the atmosphere with dread. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the wheelchair ghost appeared at the doorway, advancing. Emily's flashlight revealed her first true taste of death. One of her friends, Mark, was dragged screaming into the shadows, leaving nothing but a dark stain on the floor. The hospital wasn't just haunted. It was a predator, and Emily realized that the only way to survive might be to confront the machines and the girl herself. The central hall of the hospital was vast, filled with debris, shattered glass, and twisted metal. Dust hung in the air like a gray fog, but there was another haze too, a thick, choking smoke that seemed to rise from nowhere. Emily coughed violently, her eyes stinging, as she pulled Daniel close. The rest of the friends were already trembling, some on the verge of collapse. "This place, it's alive," Daniel whispered. Emily nodded, heart hammering. The walls creaked, and shadows slithered across the floor, forming shapes that resembled their own faces, twisted and screaming in silent agony. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the hospital itself were trying to slow them down, feeding on their fear. Then it happened. A low, dragging sound echoed behind them, wet and harsh, like something being pulled across concrete. Emily turned just in time to see Zoe, already wounded from earlier encounters, being pulled backward by invisible hands. Her screams were guttural, filled with sheer panic, and then abruptly, the sound cut off. Only the dragging continued, moving closer with each second. Emily grabbed Daniel, running down a side corridor. The smoke thickened, wrapping around them like living fingers. Their flashlights barely penetrated the haze, revealing fleeting images. The ghostly girl from the wheelchair, her eyes wide, teeth bared, hovering in midair. The smoke seemed to swirl around her, amplifying her presence, distorting her figure until she was a monstrous amalgam of death and rage. Another scream tore through the hall. This time it was Sam. He had stopped to help a friend, and the shadows caught him, wrapping around him like serpents. His limbs flailed, his body twisting unnaturally as he was dragged into a corner, leaving behind only a dark smear on the tiles. Emily felt bile rise in her throat. The hospital was claiming them one by one, and there was no pattern, no mercy. Desperation clawed at her chest. She noticed an old supply closet at the end of the hall and dragged Daniel inside. The small room offered a brief refuge. But even there, the smoke seeped in, curling around the edges of the door, whispering threats in voices both human and inhuman. Emily could feel the presence of the wheelchair ghost outside, waiting, patient, savoring every second of their terror. Flipping through the scattered papers and old files in the closet, Emily realized something. The girl's machinery, the electric restraints and experimental devices, was the source of her unnatural power. Destroying or burning the machines might weaken her, but to reach them, they would have to survive the maze, the shadows, and the wheelchair ghost itself. Emily's hands shook as she looked at Daniel. "If we don't move now, we're dead," she said. He nodded silently, understanding that there was no more running. The hospital had already claimed too many, and the rest would be next. Emily and Daniel crept through the endless corridors, the smell of smoke and charred wood thick in the air. Their flashlights barely cut through the darkness, and every corner seemed to pulse with unseen movement. The hospital had become a labyrinth, shifting around them, trapping them in a nightmare they could not escape. Suddenly, the faint hum of machinery reached their ears. Emily's heart raced. "That has to be it. The machines," she whispered. They followed the sound, each step heavy, each breath ragged. Shadows stretched along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that mimicked their worst fears. Emily could swear she saw her own reflection on the cracked tiles, only it grinned back at her with bloodstained teeth. A guttural scream erupted behind them. Emily spun around, and horror-struck. The ghost had found another victim. Daniel's childhood friend, Marcus, was being dragged backward by invisible hands. His limbs bent at impossible angles as the shadow forced him toward a dark corner. Emily tried to run, but Marcus's final scream echoed in her mind like a hammer, leaving her nauseated and trembling. Finally, they reached the old treatment wing. Rusted machines lined the walls, electric restraints, scarred tables, and a massive chair connected to broken wires. Sparks flickered as if the machines themselves were alive, and the hum grew louder, filling the hall with an oppressive energy. Emily could feel the girl's presence growing stronger, her anger radiating through the room. "Stay close," Emily whispered to Daniel, stepping toward the machines. But the ghost appeared suddenly, hovering above the floor, her bloodied teeth bared, eyes wide with unholy fury. The wheelchair hovered behind her, moving like a predator ready to strike. Shadows surged, reaching for them, trying to drag them into the machinery. Daniel tripped, screaming as a shadow wrapped around his ankle. Emily grabbed him, yanking him back, but the ghost's laughter filled the room, a sound so vile it made their ears ring. Sparks from the broken machines danced across the floor, illuminating grotesque scenes. Bloodied figures slumped against walls, charred corpses of those who had fallen before them, eyes frozen wide in eternal terror. Emily realized the machines themselves were amplifying the ghost's power. Each wire, each device, each scorched piece of metal was a conduit for her vengeance. To survive, they would have to destroy it. But approaching it meant facing her directly, letting her rage wash over them, and risking the same grotesque fate as everyone else. The ghost lunged toward them. Daniel stumbled, nearly falling into the electric restraints. Emily screamed, throwing herself between him and the ghost. Sparks arced dangerously close, illuminating the girl's twisted, scarred face and her eyes that burned with pure hatred. Time was running out. The hospital had already claimed most of their friends, and Emily knew only one chance remained: destroy the machines or die trying. The hospital's walls seemed to breathe around Emily and Daniel, shifting and twisting like a living organism. Every corridor led them back to the same frozen clocks, 2:47 a.m., mocking them with their unyielding precision. The hum of the machines grew louder, resonating through the floor and walls, vibrating through their very bones. Each breath felt like inhaling fire, each heartbeat synchronized with the ghost's sinister rhythm. Emily grabbed Daniel's hand tightly as shadows surged ahead, forming grotesque faces that screamed silently. The wheelchair ghost appeared in the center of the hall, surrounded by flickering sparks and the smoke that filled the room like an invisible sea. Her eyes glowed red now, and her grin widened unnaturally. She wheeled herself forward at impossible speed, metal scraping against tiles as if warning them that death was just inches away. Suddenly, another friend, Sarah, tripped over a broken pipe. Invisible hands shot out from the shadows, clutching her legs and dragging her across the floor. Her screams pierced the hall, echoing through every corridor, and then abruptly stopped. A dark smear was left behind, a grotesque reminder of the hospital's hunger. Emily's stomach churned as she realized no one was safe. They reached a side room filled with dusty medical charts, hoping for temporary refuge. But the ghost was relentless. The smoke thickened, curling like fingers around their ankles. Shadows of past victims appeared on the walls, faces twisted in pain, hands reaching out as if begging for escape. Emily turned to see another friend, Leo, being lifted into the air by invisible forces, his limbs bending grotesquely before he was slammed into a wall, leaving a bloody silhouette that dripped down the plaster. Emily's mind raced. The hospital wasn't just alive. It was a predator, and the ghost was its executioner. Every hallway, every shadow, every flicker of light was a trap designed to separate them, confuse them, and weaken their will. Panic clawed at her chest, but she knew hesitation meant death. "Emily!" Daniel shouted, yanking her from a shadow that had lunged at her like a living thing. Sparks from the broken machines danced across the floor, illuminating the wheelchair ghost hovering above, her teeth dripping blood, eyes wide, and her presence suffocating. The floor beneath them creaked and groaned, almost threatening to collapse. Emily realized the only way to survive was to reach the machines and destroy them, but every step brought the ghost closer. Each corridor now seemed infinite, stretching into darkness, twisting them back to where the others had died. Fear was no longer an emotion. It was a tangible force pressing on their lungs, sapping their strength, whispering that they would all join the victims. A final scream tore through the air as another friend, Daniel's cousin, was pulled backward into a black swirl of shadow and smoke. Emily fell to her knees, clutching Daniel's hand. The hospital had claimed nearly all of them, and she knew that only one way remained: face the ghost head-on, or perish in the machinery that had created her. Emily's hands shook as she stepped closer to the old, rusted machinery that lined the treatment wing. Sparks flew from the broken wires, illuminating the room in jagged flashes, revealing the charred, twisted bodies of her friends, motionless, eyes wide in eternal terror. Each corpse whispered a warning in the corners of her mind. The hospital would not let them escape. Daniel clung to her side, white-faced and trembling. "We have to destroy it, or she'll keep killing." His voice barely rose above the hum of the machines. Emily nodded, though fear rooted her feet. The wheelchair ghost hovered in the center of the room now, surrounded by the smoky haze. Her eyes glowed red, and her grin stretched impossibly wide. Sparks arced dangerously close, as if the machines themselves responded to her anger. Suddenly, the ghost lunged. Time seemed to slow. Emily barely dodged the outstretched hands, feeling cold, burning fingers brush her arm. Daniel stumbled, his foot catching on a wire, sparks igniting around him. Emily screamed, grabbing him and pulling him backward just as the ghost hissed, a sound that cut through their bones. Shadows surged around them, forming the shapes of their friends, distorted and accusing. Emily's gaze fell on the control panel of one of the machines. If she could just ignite the electrical wiring, the ghost connection to the machinery might weaken. She ripped a loose wire from the wall, gripping it like a live serpent. Sparks flew as she ran toward the center, the ghost's shriek piercing her ears. Each step was agony. The smoke thickened, almost suffocating her, and the shadows clawed at her legs, trying to drag her down. A sudden scream erupted behind her. Daniel had tried to fight off a shadow but was grabbed by invisible hands, dragged across the floor with a wet, tearing sound. Emily turned briefly to see him vanish, leaving nothing but a dark smear across the tiles. Panic surged, but she forced herself forward. Finally, she reached the machines. She tied the wires together, igniting a shower of sparks. The ghost screamed, her body twisting violently in the air. Smoke filled the room as the machinery shuddered and sparked violently. The power of the girl's vengeful spirit faltered, her red eyes flickering. Emily could feel the connection weakening. The hospital itself seemed to shudder, groaning in agony. Only a few moments remained. The ghost thrashed and lunged, but the sparks from the machines began to consume her, setting fire to the wires and the rusted metal. Shadows writhed in pain, vanishing into the black smoke. Emily felt herself pulled by a force, almost losing consciousness, but she held on, pushing the ghost's power to its limits. When the room finally erupted in a blinding flash of fire and electricity, Emily collapsed, coughing, covered in soot and ash. The ghost's scream faded into silence. For the first time, the oppressive stillness returned, but Emily knew that surviving this hospital was far from guaranteed. Emily coughed violently, ash and smoke choking her lungs as the sparks from the machines crackled wildly. The ghost thrashed in the center of the treatment wing, her bloodied grin contorting with fury. The electrical currents leapt like living snakes across the rusted machines, and the sound of metal tearing filled the room. Shadows writhed on the walls, the twisted forms of friends lost, screaming silently in torment. Emily's hands were scorched, blistered, but she refused to let go. Every instinct screamed to run, but she knew she had only one chance. The machines had to be destroyed, or the girl's vengeful spirit would never stop. She tied wires together, directing the remaining sparks toward the main machine. Sparks exploded, filling the room with a blinding light, fire crackling along the old wires. The ghost's scream was deafening, echoing through the building, bouncing off the walls and penetrating Emily's mind. Daniel, barely conscious, tried to reach her, but a shadow lunged from the floor, wrapping around his legs. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling with every ounce of strength she had, but the shadow tore him into darkness, leaving only a dark smear. Emily's vision blurred with tears and smoke, her chest heaving as fear and adrenaline battled for dominance. The ghost was upon her, floating just above the fire-scorched floor, her teeth bared, eyes blazing. Her hands shot forward, fingers like claws. Emily dodged, feeling the icy burn of her fingers scrape her arm. She twisted the wires, sending a final surge of electricity into the machine. Flames erupted, consuming the metal and wiring, spreading rapidly. The ghost screamed in agony, the fire reflecting in her wide, bloodied eyes. Emily fell to her knees, coughing, as the wheelchair overturned, sparks flying into the smoke-filled air. The oppressive presence began to fade, shadows collapsing in on themselves. The clocks on the walls remained frozen at 2:47 a.m., but the haunting presence was weakening. For the first time in hours, Emily felt a sliver of hope. She dragged herself to the exit, smoke stinging her eyes. The hospital seemed to groan one final time, as if alive, mourning the end of its power. Outside, the cold night air hit her face, and she stumbled forward, breathing heavily. Daniel was gone, the rest of their friends gone, and the hospital behind her seemed still, but Emily knew better. As she collapsed on the cracked pavement, her flashlight flickered once more. A faint, guttural whisper echoed from inside the hospital. "You can destroy my machines, but I am still here." Emily's eyes widened in terror. Somewhere deep within the blackened walls, the girl's laughter echoed. And for the first time, Emily understood the nightmare was not over.